All right, welcome to today's ILMathCom. Today we're going to be talking about the Illinois Assessment of Readiness, specifically in mathematics. I am Heather Brown. I am an ISB Math Content Specialist through ISU's Center for the Advancement of Educational Initiatives. All right, pretty close. And with me here co-facilitating is Janine Shepard. And today I will be both our facilitator, as I am for those of you that have joined us for many of our other talks. I am also going to be the person who is doing most of our speaking because I've had the great fortune of being involved in the PARCC assessment since basically the beginning. Since 2012, I've been working on the PARCC assessment. And I am currently the math chair for the math operational working group, which means I meet with a lot of people from other states. And as we transition to the Illinois Assessment for Readiness, we are still using PARCC items, so we'll keep having that relationship shared. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my window, and you can see a great picture of my family as I get my PowerPoint set up. All right, and I'm going to try to open my chat window here. Janine will also interrupt me at any point if there is some questions that are coming up. Feel free to ask throughout. If it's something that I know I'm going to come to, I'm probably just going to keep going until I get to it. But if it's something that pertains that I don't have any other information, that I don't have any other information in a different place for, I'll stop and answer those questions. Okay? All right, so basically today what we're going to kind of look at is, oops, I didn't hit the first time and I hit twice, is the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. So first of all, Pearson will be our vendor for 2019. This is the same vendor that we've had previously, so everything should look really familiar to you. You will see the IAR logo or Illinois' logo throughout, but in general, we will be, the platform will look the same to the students. They will be interacting with the items in the same place because they'll all be on TestNav still. New Meridian has provided the test content for the past several years and will continue to provide the content for both this year and next year. I do not know what platform we will be on, whether it will be on TestNav through Pearson again in 2020 or not, but that is, but the material will be coming through New Meridian, which is where we've gotten it for the past. And I will say both the content and the forms have had Illinois involvement throughout. So I personally, as well as there are a few of you on here that have helped out with PARCC in the past, and that content will continue to be used. Even as we look moving forward, I think most of the proposals that are on the table involve us continuing to use some PARCC questions further on, or New Meridian questions further on. So it will be very familiar. So we do have a few new websites. One of them that you can go to is our Illinois Assessment of Readiness page. In this page, you're going to see new information. This has been updated pretty regularly. Most of the information that you already had access to through the PARCC assessment is still accurate. The biggest difference is the difference in time, but the manuals will be updated, test information will be updated, presentations are updated on this website. But what am I trying to say? The majority of the information you've been using in the past is the same. A lot of what is being changed is we are taking rebranding in some ways, and that it is shorter. Those are the two biggest differences. You can also, we've had Pearson, parcc.pearson.com is what we've used before. This looks really, really similar to that, but it is Illinois specific, so you are welcome to use that. The parcc.pearson.com site is still available. There are other states that are still officially doing the full-length PARCC assessment that are using that website as well. So you can still use those as you want to. all of this, and we can make the PowerPoint as well as any of these links available. So if you feel like I'm going too fast, you wish you had gotten some of these links written down, you can either ask me about them in the forum, or I can certainly, they will be in the PowerPoint that you can get later. So the testing window, these are the testing windows for the entire state. So your school, especially since we have so many teachers on here, are probably using a shorter version. The state is actually strongly encouraging people to use the shortest window possible, but this is the max amount of window that you would have, is March 11th to April 26th for online, and then paper is delayed a little bit because of the protest that happened with the assessment, but now that we are good. There has been an announcement that there won't be any extensions due to cancellations of schools, just because it will have a pretty significant downstream effect on score reporting for the whole state. But if there is a problem, you can certainly talk to the assessment department. So if you go to any of the assessment, there are assessment meetings or assessment webinars every Friday morning. If you've been to any of them, you've probably seen these few slides are directly from their work, and they are updating as we go through every day. There's like new things that are live. So Pearson Access is next. Both the live and the training sites are now operational. Schools will be able to start proctor caching as soon as, oh my gosh, Monday, March 4th. You guys, Monday is March 4th. How is that possible? Okay. And district and school staff will be able to start preparing their sessions at that point. So here are several sites. We're actually going to be going through most of these sites, but this is kind of just a clear picture. If I were going to take a screenshot, this might be one, but again, I will be posting the PowerPoint, so you can certainly get it there. But the practice site that is available, practice test, released items, training modules, are all available. The biggest difference that we've seen from last year to this year is in the timing. So in the past, grades 3, 4, and 5 had 4 units. They now have 3 units that are still 60 minutes each. In the past, 6, 7, and 8, I believe they were 3 80-minute units, and now these will be 3 60 minutes. We wanted to continue to have the unit size be the same within a grade, and this year we are also able to make them the same across all the grades for schools that have full building, or full 3 through 8 all in one building. It helps with scheduling and time. We wanted a shorter test. This was something we frequently heard from people, and we want to make sure that we listened to what people were saying, but we also wanted to make sure that we kept as much of the content as possible so that we could still get useful feedback from the data. One thing that is also different is if you were a grade 7 math teacher in the past, the first unit has 2 sections. So the first unit has both the non-calculator that you start with and then switches to calculator. And now, because of the way things were shortened, 6th grade will also be like this. 6th grade will have a calculator and a non-calculator section. Grades 3 through 5 still have no calculator, and grade 8, the entire unit 1 will be non-calculator. The other 2 units are calculator. All right, I'm just going to keep going, but again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat window. I think Janine has been keeping everyone on mute because of that. Oops. So a one-pager that came out from ISBE is this, that the same standards, the same content, improved administration. This is something that you can share with your building, or if you want to share it with teachers, but it just talks about the fact that what we've already said, that we're doing a similar test to what we've done in the past, that we are shortening it, and the reasons behind it as we transition to moving towards a computer adaptive test, hopefully in 2021. And that's the website where you can find this document. On this page, on the same Illinois page, Illinois Assessment for Readiness page, there are also sample letters. The letters come in multiple different languages. So if you do want to communicate with your parents, there is a letter that you can use. It's a pretty generic letter for you to fill in your own information. It also gives, if this is the first year you're doing it online, because we are attempting to have everyone move to an online platform, because with the transition to computer adaptive that's happening in 2021, we need nearly 100% of our students testing online. Students with accommodations will still have other questions. Great question. Somebody asked, two questions about shortening of the test. So I'll go back to that slide. Are there fewer items? Yes, we proportionately cut the items. So there were about, in the same way that we've cut about a third of the time, or 25%, depending on the grade, 25 to 30% of the time, we have cut the same proportion of items. So students will be seeing fewer items. And how the test was shortened, Illinois, including myself, had a seat at that table as we discussed ways to shorten it. We tried to keep in mind both CCSSO and some of the other partners that have been working on Common Core alignment and PARCC assessments and other national assessments kind of have created guidance about what a quality assessment looks like. So we tried to keep those in mind, mainly keeping enough points that we were really focusing on the major work of the grade still. Overall, we tried to kind of proportionately shrink down the number of each domain. So we tried to keep each domain approximately the same proportion of the test as they previously were. Overall, I would say the modeling and reasoning, those open-ended questions, were cut the least, because you need a certain number of points to be able to report out that information. So we were able to save the majority of those, and those really provide the most feedback on our students. So that's what we wanted. And is there a test blueprint? On one of these slides, it will say that the test blueprint is coming soon. Yes, it has been created. We're waiting for it to be finalized and approved, and then we will be putting it out there. It will be the higher order blueprint in the same way that the previous one was, where it tells you how many 1.1 items there are, 1.2, 1.4, 2.3, 3.3, etc. Good questions. If you are interested in staying up to date, this will not be with me. This is with the assessment department in Springfield. If you want to see the webinars, they are starting to have weekly webinars. They started last week, and every Friday they will do updates. This is on all assessments, not just the Illinois assessment for readiness. So it includes WIDA and the DLM and SAT, all of those different things. It tends to be less for teachers and more for administrators, but I did want you to be aware of that. And then in relation to ISBE, here are some of the contexts that you can count. If you want something specifically from Pearson, these numbers were just added this week. We now have official customer support from Pearson that is Illinois specific. If you want to contact the ISBE and Assessment and Accountability Office or information about SIS. And I sent you in the chat window a little while ago to join our listserv, and by our listserv, I mean the listserv that Janine and I run, which is for Illinois math teachers. This is the assessment listserv that you are also welcome to join. Just pausing a little bit while I drink some water. All right, so then the majority of the rest of the things that I'm doing, we have one new resource, but otherwise a lot of these resources are resources that already existed that we're just trying to remind you that you can certainly use them as you transition. So one thing that we have is my whole screen just went black. All right, is it back? Can somebody give me a thumbs up? Okay, Janine gave me the thumbs up. Thank you. One of the things that we created, this was created with the partnership, again, I was at the table for this, but this was created with the partnership of other PARCC states. We had a lot of people who asked, there's so many different pieces of information, we try to get it all in one place. So if you have not seen the informational guides for your district, or I'm sorry, for your grade, these are a great place to start. The website is, I am so sorry. All right, let's see if we can close everything else. Okay, the website is park-assessment.org/mathematics. Has a lot of information for you to use. In this, what it has is the claim structure, which talks about the difference between subclaims A, subclaims B, subclaim C, and subclaim D. Subclaim A and B are the ones that are machine scored questions, 100%. Subclaim C are what we call the reasoning items, the type 2 items. These are the items that have open-ended components. They might have some that's closed. Subclaim D are those modeling items. We'll see 3-point or 6-point items. They also have a part that is open-ended. You may or may not notice that there's this little white box right here. The informational guides are kind of these long documents. These are not being updated at this time for the Illinois Assessment for Readiness. So it does have the number of points here, and that's the information that has changed. So I just blocked it up because those aren't true numbers anymore. Also in the informational guides, it talks about type 1, type 2, and type 3, which relate directly to those subclaims. So we have the computer scored type 1 items. I talk fast about this because this is all stuff I know inside and out. Type 2 and C automatically are linked together in my mind. So these are the written argument reasoning items. Subclaim D or type 3 are your modeling ones. Also in this, if you haven't already seen it, are your evidence statements. I was gonna get a show of hands. I can't see very many people, but how many of you are already looking at evidence statements? Or you can type yes into the, okay, I'm seeing a couple nodding heads. Are already using the evidence statement tables? Okay. All right, I see a couple nodding heads, a couple yeses that are flowing in. If you are not in these informational guides, you can see the evidence statements, and there are ones that are directly like the language of the Illinois Learning Standards. There are ones that are part of it. There are ones that are integrated. There are ones that are specifically for reasoning and ones that are specifically for modeling. And here's an example. These ones are from the reasoning component. It has clarifications. If you haven't looked at these, some people are saying they have not yet. Okay, if you haven't looked at these before, I encourage you to do so. Most of these, the evidence statement is just the standard, the Illinois Learning Standard. What's useful about these, that I think is the most useful, is these clarifications and limits. This will oftentimes, so this one says tasks should not require students to identify or name properties, which I think is important for you to know. These, keep in mind, these are assessment limits. This does not mean that you in your classroom can't ask a student to use the words like distributive property. In fact, please use these words in your classroom. But it's saying when we're basing reasoning on the properties of operation, we're asking students to understand the properties, not necessarily to know the names. So I really encourage you to look through those. It also tells you in 6th, 7th, and 8th, it'll tell you which of these are calculator and which of these are non-calculator. Also in the same informational guide, so this is all in the same document still, there's information on the calculators that can be used. It will talk about, this is the grade 6, some of this information is only for high school. It will talk about the rulers and protractors you can or need to use. It will show you the tools. It will talk about scratch paper. And then we also have the mathematics reference sheets. This box is because there's going to be a link, but I must have clicked on it wrong. The mathematics reference sheets, which are also staying the same as they previously were. So just point of questions. And then this, again, this entire document that has the evidence statements and all those other tidbits in it, this is all available at park-assessment.org/mathematics, and that's where the evidence statements as well as the informational guides are. Okay, so what we learned from PARC and what we hope to continue to use is these are probably the places where we see the most difficulty. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these individually, and then we're going to kind of talk about a few resources that either we've created or that we suggest that you use. So integrated problems, those are items where students are having to use more than one standard at the same time. PARC does identify certain ones that in their evidence statements that specifically you have to use more than one, but something to think about is that sometimes when we're teaching and assessing locally, we're doing too much siloing. Definitely what we see both in every classroom that I'm in as well as in the data is that students have the most difficulty with the reasoning and modeling items. Those are the items that involve the open-ended writing information about mathematics in them. I will say I have 2 children that are currently within the PARC age bands that will be taking PARC assessments, and I still very frequently do not have, my kids don't talk about writing in mathematics. So really, really thinking about practice standard 3, constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others, having students talk and argue about mathematics in your classroom, but then also on their paper, asking them to write about it. Multiple select tends to be something, and we do have a resource that we've created to work on that. Those are the items that look like multiple choice, except they say in the early grades, they actually tell you select 3 of these. And in the upper grades, they may or may not say that. They might just say select all that apply, as well as items with multiple parts. So things that have more than one section, so students keep looking forward. If we think about all of these are all things that really we should be working on in our classrooms anyhow. You know, the idea of focus, coherence, and rigor, the rigor really being conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and application. These are the things that we need to be seeing in our classroom. So some of the ways to do this, these are what the new assessment evidence statement analysis sheets will look like. Although these are mock-up versions, and I find it interesting, I'm pretty sure a mathematician didn't create them. Because if you look, the school district is below this, the school is below the state in almost everything, but the district is above the state in almost everything. It's pretty unusual that that happens. But what we see here that I want you to look at, how many of you, can I again see, can you either say yes or no? Or can you give me a show of hands? It obviously wouldn't say Illinois Assessment of Readiness, it would say PARC. How many of you have seen these documents and are using these documents when you talk about student data? Okay, some of you are like, yep, absolutely. Good. No, I see some shaking heads, no. Yep, I hear somebody saying absolutely. But those of you who have not seen these before, what these are is these are showing in difficulty by the whole state. You got it? Okay. By the entire state, these are talking about the difficulty level. So the blue line in the middle, I'm using the word line loosely, is the state data. And these are all the evidence statements that students would have interacted with in the state. The orange here, like I said, are school, and the green is district, which doesn't quite make sense. But usually what we're going to look at is we're going to try to find ones where our school is significantly below average or even significantly above. Like you might want to look at this one and say, like, what are we doing right? And should we be telling other people about it? Also, these ones that are significantly below, like why are our students having trouble with this 5 in 1? Well, the integrated standards, maybe we need to spend more time making sure that students see how these things are making connections between each other. Or maybe we're not teaching this fractions unit. The one thing I will say, the first year that we started using these, which I think was last year or 2 years ago, what we had a lot of people were like, well, how do our kids have a 0? Like, why are 0% getting them? So I did include this this comes with it. This is an accompanying, and what this has here is, you guys can see my cursor? Yes? Okay. What this has here is this tells you how many students we're talking about. So sometimes you will see this item where there's only 2 students here, or there's only 1 student here. If there's 0, it really wouldn't, you won't show up. But if there's 1 or 2, oftentimes what that means is that maybe 1 or 2 students may have been on an accommodated test. And if they were on, like, let's say the Braille test, probably you only had 1 student take that test. And when we look at these, we can kind of keep that in mind, that if we look back and we say, okay, this one, when I look at my key, there were only 2 kids taking it. So I might want to keep that in mind as not being as concerned. What is the name of this new report with the student count? This comes right with it. This should be the same. This is the student evidence statement analysis. It does usually come hand in hand. Like, as I've never seen them not married to each other, but maybe not. But that's my understanding, is that they've always been together. Okay. People are asking where you found them. You really would have to talk to, all right, I have multiple questions here. So you really have to talk to your administrators about these. Administrators have access. They can share them. There are a lot of schools that this is what they spend their professional learning time doing together, is working on these. There are other ones, as we're saying here, that let you look at them and then they're taken away. So, I mean, it's up to you to kind of communicate with your administrators if you want to be using them. Amanda, you asked, how do we get the evidence statements? I'm not sure if you're talking about the evidence statements or this report. So the report, you would have to go through your administrator. The evidence statements are way back a few slides ago when I said, right here, this is the place where the evidence statements and the informational guides are. So this park-assessment.org/mathematics. Okay. So a couple things to think about with the evidence statement analysis. You're not getting results for specific test items. You're getting them based on the groups or the clusters of the standards. General results, these are general results, not individual students or subgroup results. We don't see percentages. And always to keep in mind, anytime I've ever talked about PARCC or Illinois assessment or any other assessment, is that each of these is one measure of a student's performance, and we always want to consider that when we're talking to parents, when we're talking to teachers. This is one isolated day. Students have bad days, teachers have bad days, Heather has bad days. So we recognize that. Thanks, Janine, for typing that in here. Somebody asked why are some of the questions, so students are seeing different, the question is, why do some standards have 64 kids asked, but only half that are asked of the other ones? So students are seeing different forms of the test. So all the tests are built to the same specifications or blueprints, but we have multiple forms that students are seeing. It is possible that there are some questions that are on both forms or on all of the forms. And that would probably indicate why some of these would have bigger numbers and some of these would have smaller numbers. So depending on what version of the assessment everybody was seeing. Also keep in mind that this is, again, fictional data. So sometimes the fictional data doesn't always make sense for the person. Like I said, the fact that the school is really underperforming, but the district is very much overperforming doesn't exactly make sense either. So, no, student count, I think student count is how many kids saw that. Somebody asked, is the student count the students answering correctly? And someone else asked, a student won't necessarily be tested on every standard. That's correct. And that was true before, even in the shorter, or even in the longer version of the test, that every test has a probability of any one item. So based on whether it's major work or minor work, or major work or additional or supporting work, you might have one that has a 100% chance that every kid will see that standard. And you might have items where not every kid will see that standard. And that's been true before, and it will be slightly smaller. The proportions had to go down in order to fit onto the smaller test. Usually when that happens, that we have groupings of evidence statements. So like, let's say if a student, I'm just throwing out numbers here, didn't see 4NF2, they would probably have to see 4NF3 or something that was related to it. It's not like there wouldn't be a possibility that a kid just wouldn't see numbers and fractions. Like, it would be a choice. They have to see this one.
You can just put it.
So some ways for us to look at this, how evidence statement and tables can be used, is I encourage people to start at any point where you are. Reviewing the standards is a great place to start, which is down here. It doesn't matter. Thinking about how that affects your curriculum and your instruction. Then using your data, looking at your data from the assessment, and then comparing that to the evidence statements to kind of figure out what are the standards that you need to work the most on. And then kind of keeping in mind that data is continuously flowing, that you're coming through it. All right, so one of the things, confidential, when it says confidential, do not distribute, that means admin is not supposed to give to teachers. No, that means that it's not something you should be publishing. Where does it say that? Oh, here. Do not distribute. Yeah, it means that you shouldn't be, it shouldn't be published information. It shouldn't be something that is, we shouldn't be putting it on a board in the same way that you're allowed to know certain information about students that can help you. All right, something that we have just started doing is we are creating what are called formative assessment probes. If you are a new or a returning fan of ILMathCom, we had 2 discussions on formative assessment last month. Were they both in February? Both in January. I don't know when they were.
February.
It was in February. Okay. So I think 1 in January, 1 in February, right? So we had 2 sessions on formative assessment probes and how to use them. I really encourage you to go watch those if you have time. But basically what we have just started doing is trying to take PARCC released items that are mostly multiple select, some multiple choice, and putting them into a format. This is where you can find them. They're on mathteachersinaction.org is just the website that you should know. So if you're not already on mathteachersinaction.org, that's where many of the things are housed. And this one is under Illinois Resources Formative Assessment Probes at this time. You can find these. And what they look like is they look like we've basically just taken these assessment questions and kind of made it into one full page. Excuse me. I encourage you to use these when they fit into your curriculum. So this is why we started labeling them by content standard. So when you are teaching numbers-based 10 in 5th grade, that this is a good thing for you to use. It is not just asking students to say yes or no. It is instead asking them to explain your thinking. And again, we spent 2 full webinars on this, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the idea of how students writing out their thinking really helps you understand if their misconception is something really small. It also lets you know if they actually really get it, but they're not necessarily clicking yes or no correctly, or clicking, the multiple select buttons correctly. It lets you know if sometimes they're guessing right and their understanding is actually very flawed, but they still were able to get the answer correct, so to speak. So when using these, what we found, we asked teachers to use these in the class, we got some back, is that they really reveal student thinking. They reveal their most misconceptions. Students see how multiple answers can be correct, which is really important because this isn't something, I try to not talk too much about test-taking strategies. I talk more about how to fit this into your curriculum in a valuable way to instruction and curriculum. But this does help them understand that there are multiple ways for you to show your answer, or there can be multiple correct answers. So it's useful in that way. And like I said, you can watch the formative assessment on ILMathCom for more info. I'm still trying to follow the questions in the chat window as well. So that's something that I think is great that hopefully you're using. One thing I will say right now is there are many, many, many more multiple choice and multiple select questions on the assessment that we have not yet converted over. If you go ahead and decide, like, this is a question I'm going to use, feel free to send it to me. And when you send it to me, we can put it up there if you make a generic one. These are downloadable in, I believe, Janine, they're in Word right now? Okay. They're Word documents that you can download. So if you do want to edit, or if like maybe you always put group number here or something like that that you want students to have, feel free to take them down and edit them as necessary so that they're useful in your classroom. We were told that any student can have their math test read to them using text-to-speech on their Chromebooks. Do you know if this is correct? A student has to be identified as needing text-to-speech. You do not need to be a text-to-speech student. You do not need an official accommodation. The teachers can turn it on, or the school can turn it on without there being an official. There doesn't need to be an IEP or a 504. I will say, so we have heard of schools that are just giving this access to everyone. I will say that most students that aren't used to using it in the classroom are actually finding it very distracting, because it will read tables. Like, it would read this table as, which of these is equal to 83.041? A table with 3 columns and 6 rows. The first column, first row, says statement. The first column, second row, says yes or no, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually, for a kid who can read just fine, it's quite distracting. But yes, the school can choose to turn that feature on for students. The next thing that I will say, the next thing that I encourage you to use, which is how we created those formative tasks, is the released items. So if you go to parkassessment.org, that is the New Meridian and the Park house right now for anything that is public information for all the Park states. In this, the released items are all still valuable, because they are all things that we will continue to be using this content. So one of the things you can find is, in any one grade, you can find any of the released items. You can look and you can see what evidence statement it was assessing, what subclaim it was, and you can see how many forms it was on. So again, you can kind of see, like, this question right here was only on an accommodated form in 2018. It may have been on the other forms, probably was on other forms in previous years. But that might be one where we only see a couple points, or a couple students, I'm sorry, taking it. Okay, so an example here. I'm going to go ahead and let you look at this and just kind of think about the thinking that you're going to use. And then I'm going to show you the second part. All right, and then the second part is the open-ended portion. And you can see it's showing a number line in the first one. It's asking them to do something similar in the second one. And what I like about the released items is not only can we see the test question. Oh, somebody just gave this to one of their 5th graders. Good for you. You can also see what it's aligned to. So you can see what forms it was on. This is just a miniature snapshot of the previous slide. What forms it was on. You can see it's from a reasoning question. And then if you go to the evidence tables, you can see what this is assessing. So it's basing explanation and reasoning on a number line diagram related to 5NF2. So things that we can see how it's related. I also like the fact that for these open-ended questions, there are answer keys for all the items, but for these open-ended questions, you also get full rubrics. So I can get the machine scored component, but I can also see the rubric for the hand scored item, and I can see where the points went to. In addition, ways that I think are useful to use these released items in your classroom is there are also anchor papers and practice papers that show these are real student responses. These are students that have taken the test. And this is one of the responses. This one I picked was the first response. So chances are it is one of the higher scored ones. So I can see the response. I can also see the annotation that explains what they did correctly or incorrectly. So this one is a good example of the fact that this doesn't ask the students to subtract using a traditional algorithm by any means. And this makes the note of, no, they did this, but they also used the number line as was requested. So one of the reasons I picked this item is because in general, if an item doesn't tell you how to solve the problem, you can use any method you want. Like if this just asked for this, they could use the number line, or they could use, using the general algorithm for subtraction of fractions. But if it specifically says explain using a number line, which makes sense that it does because that's the evidence statement as well, then we have to make sure that to get full credit, they're using number lines. You could also take this opportunity to show them one. There are multiple student responses here. So you can show them one that instead of getting a 2, it got a 1 or even a 0, and have the students consider what part of the response was correct, what part was incorrect. We oftentimes refer to the My Favorite No video. If you haven't seen it, that's a great place to kind of see that error analysis and having the teacher talk through how each work is some good components and correct components and some incorrect components. So this is the website that has the practice tests. So up until now, these were on the PARC website, parcassessment.org. These are on Pearson's website. On Pearson's website, we see the practice tests. So I did all these screenshots earlier, so I can go to these sites live if we have time, but I wanted to give the screenshots to make sure that if there was any internet problem, I had it all correct. But you can see here, this is where you can see manuals, the training modules, etc., technology, all of these things. The two things we're going to talk about are in this test preparation. And in test preparation, oh, is that the, Rebecca, did you just put My Favorite New? In the test preparation, there are both online tutorials, student tutorials, and practice tests. And this is at ILMyPearsonSupport.com. It does not have a www, just to kind of point that out, because that's something I frequently type in incorrectly. In the practice test, if I click on this, the practice test has, I can click on any of the grades, and you can also see that there are the versions of the test. And the person who asked earlier about the text-to-speech, there are text-to-speech versions so that you can see how the students would interact with that. And then there's just the general version, which is the first one. There is not a paper version because, again, Illinois is requesting that all students on all schools as much as possible move to the computer version. There is also not at this time the answer keys. Those are supposed to be up shortly. The answer keys on the old parc.pearson.com, those websites, it's still available. But on this website, they just, as we've been transitioning everything over, and as these tests now are the shorter version. And so we have to remake all those answer keys as well. And these, Janine, I don't think you need to put this, I mean, you can put the link in if you want, but it is really just the same link that mypearsonsupport.com, except you're going into the practice test and into math is where I went to. And while you're in there, these do give a great chance if you do want to do the practice test. They are intended to be, less than 1 hour each unit. These are basically the same length as the test, except they do not include field test items. So field test items will make this a little bit longer. So every student will see a few more items with field test items embedded into them. But this gives you I just picked this item, this was the first item, that you can see students can do drag and drop and practice that. They can also practice using, this is the equation editor math only. There's also equation editor math and text. In test preparation, in that same box that we went to on the Pearson site, there are also tutorials. A couple tutorials that I want to show you. TestNav 8 tutorial is mainly how to log in. If any of your students are above 3rd grade, chances are it's pretty user-friendly. You used it last year, you should be fine. Online student tutorials down here. At the bottom of the page, you can have tutorials that are specific for your grade band and for your and for math versus ELA. And in those, students can practice all the different interactions that you have. So the interactions of the drag and drop like we saw previously, or equation editor, all of those things. You can also do, over here, there's this practice with the equation editor. This just gives you a blank equation editor. If your kids know how to do screenshots, like if you're asking your students to work on problems online that are just your problems, not necessarily related to PARCC, you can just go to this practice with the equation editor, and it'll show you, you can have them do screenshots and email them to you or print them so that you can see that you can use this as a tool. My son does all of his work online. He has a writing disability, and so things like this are very useful for him. They also, if you have not already seen it, there is in grades 3 to 5, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we started incorporating items that include a drawing tool. This was something that was asked for from the field, and that we responded to by trying to by creating a drawing tool. Some items have them and some don't. So this was my perfect answer. There are 19 people at a park, 3 tables, exactly 6 people. Can all 19 people fit? And so I did some math up here, and then I drew my sad guy who didn't fit because he was an extra person. So I encourage you, if they haven't already tried the drawing tool, that's definitely something in the tutorial that they would want to see. All right. Then my last thing is just that there are other great resources out there, as we've linked to multiple times today. Is the mathteacherinaction.org is the website that Janine and I work on. From there, the IL Teach and Talk has number talks for specific standards. So if you see specific standards, as well as illustrative math. These are just a few of those when you're looking at your evidence statement reports and you're seeing these, that students, we really want this standard we need help with. These are good places to go. Kelly, thanks for the question. They do not have to do a drawing. A student could fully explain what they did in sentences here. In fact, I would say I probably wouldn't get full credit because I didn't use any explanation here except my drawing. I would have to go to the rubric to see if that would be full enough explanation. But you do not have to use the drawing tool for any of our current items. I don't know if at some point, if all of our items get drawing tools, if that would be something that would be added. But as of right now, that is not something. Students can just write it out. Okay. Other questions? Any other questions? Then I'm going to go ahead and just kind of live show some of these things that I just did. There's my lovely family again. And so if I go to il.mypearson, I'm going to just show you these couple things. So there were the tutorials and there were the practice tests. I was talking about in the tutorials, there are, yeah, Louisa asked, are the tools there? I'm sorry, I keep getting distracted by the questions. The same tools are there as before. So there are still the online tools that are all the same. The ruler, protractor, calculator, all of those things are the same. So if I want to practice my equation editor, I can ask, and these were purposely blank. This was, again, something that was asked for from the field so that people could practice. There's the math only one, which looks like this. And if I try to type letters, it won't let me. Ooh, it did let me. If I try to type spaces, things like space or other features that couldn't be in there, it wouldn't let me. And then I can use, you know, I can practice using, I can practice using the equation editor. So if this is a question we got asked a lot, so we opened this up. So basically, Rebecca, if you wanted to give to your students a question, you could ask them to express their reasoning on here. And then, I mean, I just do screenshots like this and mail them or save them or something like that. But I thought this was useful. And again, so many of the things that we have on here are things that were requested earlier. The online student tutorial for the person who asked about rulers, I have all the same options that I had before. So I can do the same things that I had. And so there's just to look through, students can look through what a multiple choice looks like, et cetera, et cetera. And then that was tutorials. Before that were the practice tests. Go to math, and I was going to grade 4. One thing you can have students do, and again, this is for more like a print, if you are going to have them do a printout, is it will default to guest. Instead of doing guest, I can write my name. And then if I want to print out something at the end, it would have my name instead of, if I wanted students, some people print this page, teachers will have them print this page, and it would have my name so that you'd be able to distinguish when you're looking at different kids' papers. So you would know what student did what. And then I'm going to go to the Park assessment page. Most commonly, so we showed 2 different things from here. Under test design, assessment test design is where we saw the blueprint. And these, keep in mind, this is a Park page. So these high-level blueprints are the Park full-length test. We have created something like this. We're waiting for it to be approved and to go public for how many items like this are on the test for the for Illinois' shortened version. But the way down at the bottom, these are the informational guides. The informational guides are the things that have all of those components, including the evidence statements in them, the claim structure. And again, these points wouldn't be true for us. Yeah, so 2 different people just asked, or I guess it was the same person twice, how the test was shortened. So we proportionately, we determined how many points were necessary to still have the same claims that we already had. We then looked at things that we had duplicates of that were more likely to, that we maybe already had 2 questions of. So that was a common place to shorten. In general, we tried to keep the test proportionately the same points per domain. This isn't 100% true, but that was one of our goals. We also kept the goal of the high quality assessments to keep a certain percentage, depending on the grade. I think it's as high as 75% in grades 3, and then I think it goes down a little bit after that, from the major work. So we attempted to do that. But in general, it was a proportional shortening. So all of the standards still have a possibility of being on there. They may have 1/2 probability instead of a 1 probability of being on the test. So common places where this would happen, like I think this is a great example to look at, is you might see these two standards, 40841 and 40842. These are 2 evidence statements from one standard. There's actually 4 evidence statements here from one standard. It may have been, I don't know the numbers, that this used to be any one student would get 2 of these. And we may have made it and said, you know what, this is all one standard. We're going to make it so any one student will see 1 of these. And so on average, on every test, 1 of these would show up. And on average, each of these would show up on 25% of the tests, on 25% of the forms. I hope that answers the question. And then also on the Park site is where you get those released items. And they are mostly searchable now. So I can search, I don't know why grade 5 is above grade 3, but I can search for grade 5 mathematics. And if you want to specifically see the ones that are the newest year, you can. So we see, and in these are where we can see the sample students, we can see the answer keys, we can see the alignments, we can see the item set. Is the proportion of procedural questions to higher order thinking questions the same? So our items aren't specifically, I mean, are we talking about, maybe we should you should unmute and ask this question. Hold on. So are the questions, so in general, we did keep more of the open-ended modeling and reasoning items. So that proportion is a little bit, we have a little higher proportion of that because we didn't lose as many of them, but go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I have lots of background noise, so I was trying to, but my question is looking at like the type 1 questions versus type 2 or 3, and then those, the standard clusters, like standard cluster C or standard cluster D, compared to just the standards themselves in like the A or B.
Yes.
Unchanged.
So what happened was we actually ended up with, nothing went up. So we don't have anything that got bigger. But the type 2s and 3s, which are the reasoning and the modelings, we actually maintained a little higher percentage of those. And that was because in order for us to report out the student reports, how you get something for major work, additional work, reasoning and modeling, we were already at close to the lower limit for those. So we couldn't shorten it quite as much as the type 1 items. So there were a little more type 1 proportionately cut than type 2s and 3s. If that answers that.
That does. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely. I mean, if anybody asks, there are definitely still open-ended questions. There are almost the same number of open-ended questions as there were before. Any other questions? Because we are at 4:30. And I sent my boss the slides and she said, you're going to have to speed talk. And she was right. All right, then I thank you for coming. This will be recorded. We will try to copy some of the chat questions into the forum and put this online. But thank you so much. We can stop recording.